Chapter 2, one of the many proofs which are confidently brought forward to demonstrate that the British are Israelites, is that God promised to them the wealth of the world, the greatest amount of territory, rain in season, health for fruitfulness, and his love. Some of Edward Hines' heads of identity read as follows: Israel must be above all other nations. Israel must be a Christian people. Israel conquers against all odds. Other chapters deal with the glory of exemption from war, the glory of saving millions a year, the glory of righteous taxation. Writing about the year 1873, just after the Franco-German War, he foresaw the fast approaching Gentile struggles that must shortly convulse the entire continent from one end to the other. That war would be the most gigantic, terrible, and costly that had ever yet been known to history. National debts would increase enormously and the nations would decay. But the English people, being identical with Israel, will become entirely exempt from these warlike operations. Only the Gentile nations were to be punished, because during that terrible time of trouble, God's people Israel were to hide themselves, withdraw from all part in the conflict, and be neutral. No wonder Hines' specious promises led astray so many gullible people by offering them what looked like a very near millennium. If Britain would only accept his program, it would annihilate infidelity, secure the outpouring of the Spirit upon all the British people, purify the Church of Britain, give us Christian union, godly legislation, equitable taxation, a long rest from warfare. It will secure for us abounding prosperity, and so on. The Lord once said to his disciples, Matthew 24:9, you shall be people hated by all the Gentiles because of my name. One would think that if the British people want to be hated by all nations, the best thing to do would be to press the above extravagant claims to possess the wealth and territory of the world. Nothing could provoke huge wars so easily. 60 years ago, John Beddoe, in the Anthropological History of Europe, wrote that the Jews are gradually attracting to themselves the whole movable wealth of the earth, and wealth is power, and the world must move or halt as wealth bids it. Many others have said the same thing. There is no doubt that the protocols of the learned elders of Zion told the truth. Far from Britain being hidden in time of wars, she had twice in the present century rushed into a war against a much bigger foe, almost naked and unarmed. Far from accumulating the wealth of the world, Britain now has a national debt of 26,000 million pounds, and with the highest rate of taxation in the world, which is slowly crippling trade and commerce and industry. Far from extending her territories, she has been parting with them. Far from abounding prosperity, Britain must export or die, and keep up exports and increase them. Articles which do not come up to the standard for export are left for the natives. British Israelites are honest enough to admit that the shortcomings of the British are serious, but they claim this does not matter. All of God's true saints have serious shortcomings, but are aware of them and loathe them. Yet Britain is little concerned about an annual expenditure of about £2,000 million on tobacco, drink, and gambling. The government seizes a large part of all this, which justifies the extravagance and the wastage, and encourages Israel to go on squandering the earth. That Israel is in quotation marks. In spite of all the confessed shortcomings of Britain, Edward Hine had the temerity to say that Britain was literally the only Christian nation upon the earth. Another writer much more recently writes, the majority of Christians in the world today are Anglo-Saxons. And so Paul is thrust aside. Paul, who states that to him was it granted to evangelize to the Gentiles the untraceable riches of the Christ, Ephesians 3:8. Paul, who proclaimed this secret among the Gentiles, Christ among you, the expectation of the glory, Colossians 1:27. Indeed, these spurious Israelites repose far more faith in the Great Pyramid than in the sacred scriptures in Paul. Says Hine, the Great Pyramid is therefore now perfectly unique as a visible material monument of divine inspiration. Had this been true, we may be sure that the Lord would have said something about the pyramid. But there are many people who show themselves very much wiser than the Lord. Actually, there are no Anglo-Saxons now on earth. What the above-mentioned writer meant was that the majority of Christians are English-speaking. If his remarks were confined to Britain, there are many people there who would never think of calling themselves Anglo-Saxons. The word, in any case, is entirely a misnomer. The primitive English living in what is now northwest Germany called themselves the Angel or Ingle, but never knew themselves as Saxons. They were known as Saxons by the foreign peoples around them, broad-headed peoples who spoke other tongues. In the same way, till this day, the Welsh call the Englishmen Sars, or S-A-I-S, Sais, and the Scottish Gael calls him Sassenach. Many nations call themselves by a name which foreigners do not use. The Germans call themselves Deutsch, while the British call the people of Holland the Dutch. The early English or Angles and the peoples with whom they were associated in ancient times in northwest Germany called any foreigners the Wellan or Weld or stranger, W-E-A-L-H or stranger. The word Welsh is an English term meaning stranger. The Welsh people called themselves Cymry, C-Y-M-R-Y, meaning either borderers or allies. One German name for Italy is Welschland. The Valais, V-A-L-I-S, districts of Switzerland are those occupied by the Welsh, that is, non-Germans. Wallachia is the land of the strangers. This brings us to one of the strongest proofs that the British or the English are Israelites. We are told that names for trees, animals, and agriculture. Whitney's a... Oh, I skipped the page, sorry. We are told that the word Saxons is only a contraction of Isaac's sons. In nothing do the British Israelites fail so ignominiously as in their derivations of words. Not one of them seemed to have a competent knowledge of the Hebrew language and its structure. The most absurd statements are greedily swallowed by gullible people who are quite unable to check them. In the first place, it seems extraordinary that outside nations call the primitive English Saxons or Isaac's sons, while these English did not know what this referred to. And these surrounding people used not their own Celtic or Frankish or Slavonic terms, but the English word sons. This makes one very suspicious. So does the fact that surnames did not use the ending sons until perhaps 500 or 600 years ago. Therefore, the word Saxons, if an old word, cannot contain the word sons. But there is a reason very much stronger for rejecting the derivation given. There is no Hebrew name equivalent to Isaac. The Hebrew name is Yitzchak, Y-I-T-Z-K-H-A-Q, sounded very differently from Isaac, and meaning he will laugh or make merry. If, however, the word Saxon is only a contraction from Isaac's sons, it could never lose the stressed first syllable. When words become boiled down by constant usage, they retain the stressed syllable always. Another very clever derivation is that of the word British. Most cunning was the person who first discovered that this meant man of the covenant. This is said to be derived from brith, covenant, and ish or aish, man. But in Hebrew, these words would mean covenant of man, not man of the covenant. What is more, Hebrew possesses no compound common nouns of this nature. As for the ending ish, by the same method, we should need to call the Irish the man of fear. The ancient Britons never called themselves British. The ending ish is purely Germanic. The Britons are thought to have come from Gaul, where their language was spoken. Linked up with the origin of the British people is the very much bigger matter of their relatives on the continent of Europe. If these ancient British folk, whether Britons in Gaul or Angles in northwest Germany, were really Israelites, the surprising fact emerges that they had relatives among the surrounding nations, some of whom were closely related, while others more distantly related. This applies not only to speech, but also to physical characteristics. In the shape of a rough circle, the more important European languages still stand as they did perhaps 2,500 years ago, occupying the same relative positions to each other as they did then. The Celtic group in the extreme west, then the Germanic, then the Baltic Slavonic, then the Armenian, then the Greek, then the Italic, which in turn borders upon the Celtic. And bordering upon the Baltic, Slavonic, Armenian, and Greek, there is the member that wandered far off into India, the Sanskritic group. Among the European groups, there is a broad unity in the general fabric of language, most notable in the names for trees, animals, and agriculture. Whitney's opinion was that for prehistoric times, correspondence of language gives the strongest presumption of correspondence of descent, and that the unity of Indo-European speech implies underlying unity of stock present among the early peoples who used it. While that would be true in the early days of the European family, at the present time there must be few areas in which the language spoken is the same as was spoken 2,000 years ago. Friesland is one.